All right, everyone, we are almost there to the end of the quarter. We have one more lecture after this one, so we're going to pack in as much as we can, so we usually don't delay. All right, today we're going to talk about fake news. That might be the word of the year, the word maybe even of last year. You know, many of you probably know as much as we do about fake news because it's everywhere in the news media. It's in conversations day to day. We're going to talk about the kinds of environments that facilitate the spreading of this kind of information. If you could rewind the tape over the last 6 months and look at all the fake news stories, there was one that really stood out. If you just look at the numbers and you look at some of the research papers on this particular topic, can you kind of think which one it was? Anyone? What's that? That was a good one. That was up there. You'll see.
My guess.
It was one of, that would have been my guess as well. Anyone else? What was one of the biggest, by the numbers, according to several different news agencies that have looked at this?
Real or fake?
Fake, yeah. Fake news. Oh, anyone else want to? Yes. Wow, you guys are good.
Well
All right. So this particular story, this fake news story, came out. It spread like wildfire. According to the story, Pope Francis shocked the world, endorsed Trump for the president in a release of a statement. This particular article first appeared on a news webpage that doesn't exist anymore. But this item was shared, at least on the numbers corroborated from different sources, at least 1 million different times, just on Facebook alone. But as you already know, if you've been awake over the last several months or even through the last cycle, it was false. And it's been deduped by many of the sort of core resources that are out there to do fact-checking. The cool thing about Synopsis, by the way, it's a local organization that's here in the Northwest. It's been doing its work since the 1990s. And we may be lucky enough to have the founder and president of this organization come give a talk in the fall when we teach this course. So that'll be good. But it was debunked. You know things are bad. You know this was a bad act if the Pope himself compares this act of sharing information. This wasn't about the president. This was about the sharing of fake news to, if you guys can see this word right here, the love of shit. If the Pope is saying this, you know this is bad. In fact, what's interesting is cropophilia is it's a strong love for this kind of stuff. He had to change it because in Spanish it has a slightly different meaning. He changed it to cropophagia, and cropophagia just means of eating of.
All right, so if the Pope tells you to eat shit, you're really doing something wrong, right?
That's the whole point there, since we've got a theme going on in this particular class this quarter. This just came out this morning. Doesn't look like he's too happy either about fake news or maybe his morning routine. This is the site, one of the sites that was hosting this particular news item. If you search for it now, you go to the server, you get a 404. It doesn't exist anymore. Remember Brandolini's asymmetry principle, the BS asymmetry principle? It applies in this scenario too, because even with a knockdown of the site, even with a lot of these places that were hosting it and spreading it are coming out and said, yes, it was false, it still didn't stop this from being spread to millions of people. That one is another one of those examples where it is annoying and it certainly has an impact, but there are more serious consequences to the spreading of this fake news. There was a recent article just in May of this month, in 2017, written in Time magazine that really caught our attention. I would read it if you want to be a little bit worried about the current situation.
A little bit.
A little bit,
a
yeah.
Little bit.
So if you read the article, it goes into it goes into more than just the spreading of fake news around political items. It's around the spreading of misinformation in your everyday lives. On Twitter, for example, Russia, at a scale that's never been seen before, is infiltrating bots into your Twitter channels, putting malware in those links, getting access to your information, and trying to influence you in ways that we should be concerned. We should be concerned because, as we'll say many times throughout, democracy really is at stake here. These were according to BuzzFeed, these were the top fake election stories by Facebook engagement. They have a service where they can go, and they have a paid service where you can do this kind of analysis. But you can see Pope Francis. The Pope Francis news item is on top. You see, this Hillary sold weapons to ISIS is up there. You see FBI agents suspected in Hillary. Email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. These were the top ones that were shared. You do see a high number of these on the pro-Trump side, but they're also on the pro-Hillary side too. So you do see, maybe not in the top list here, but you certainly see them all over. We'll talk about some of those numbers. Here's probably one of the more depressing graphs of all. This is what scares me as a citizen. If you look at the top graph, you see mainstream news. These are engagement referrals on Facebook. If you look at the mainstream news over this election cycle, you find that right around election day, there was a crossing point where there was more engagements and sharing of Facebook fake news than mainstream news. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that people were reading those items more. We don't know. We can't track all the reading. But according to this analysis, you see more fake news spreading around than mainstream news that you would hope is somewhat legitimate and checked by third parties. So here's what we want you to get from today. So if this is the only place you pay attention, these are the things that we want you to have as take-homes. Because again, a lot of you have heard of fake news. This is how we've distilled it down to about a 50-minute lecture. First of all, fake news is not new. It's been around for a long time, but its societal impact may be somewhat new. Why is it spreading? Pretty simple. Easy money, and it's cheap to make. Just like the quote that we mentioned on the first day, falsehood flies quickly and the truth comes limping after. That really applies to what we're seeing in our environments today. And social media and this strongly partisan environment that we now live in has really created this perfect storm for this kind of problem. And really something that Carl will talk a little bit about is these click-driven revenue models are really exacerbating this problem by promoting catchy headlines and headlines that sort of, or even pictures or anything that sort of draws you into generating advertising money.
I've got 7 quick slides that'll blow your mind.
So, and then we will just end with just saying, fight back. Use some of these different sources. Use your own thinking caps and try to fight back a lot of this fake news that's infiltrating. Especially if those numbers are true, where we're seeing crossing over of fake news spreading more than true news. That's pretty scary.